What's your view today? We're going to take a look at LeetCode problem number 262, trips and users. Marked as hard, and it's the second most frequently asked one on LeetCode. So let's get into it. So the problem states the trips table holds all taxi trips. Each trip has a unique ID, while client ID and driver ID are both foreign keys to the user's ID at the users table. Status is an enum type of completed, cancelled by driver, and cancelled by client. So it can only have these three values, which is important. And the users table holds all users. Each user has a unique user's ID, and role is an enum type of client, driver, and partner. So once again, can only have these values. Write a SQL query to find the cancellation rate of requests made by unbanned users. Both client and driver must be unbanned between October 1st, 2013 and October 3rd, 2013. Cancellation rate is computed by dividing the number of cancelled requests by either client or driver made by unbanned users by the total number of requests made by unbanned users. For the above tables, your SQL query should return the following row with the cancellation rate being rounded to 2 decimal places. So just one day and the cancellation rate for these 3 dates. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's get into it. So to sum it up, we want to calculate a cancellation rate, which is a ratio of requests that were cancelled against all requests. And then we have that condition of having only unbanned users, so clients or drivers. And that is pretty much it. We should just round the cancellation rate to 2 decimal places and only calculate it for these dates between October 1st and October 3rd, 2013. So let's start out by selecting request at, which is the only date we have in our tables. So that will produce our day output, so let's call it day. And then we need to calculate our ratio here already and call that cancellation rate. We need to put that into quotes because it contains a space, and we're selecting from mainly our trips table. Since we're calculating that cancellation rate for each day, we're going to group by day here, or request at, calling that day. And let's get to our cancellation rate. So as we said, we want to calculate the number of cancelled requests against all requests. Then later we're going to take care of that only being unbanned users. So first we're going to just focus on establishing that ratio or that rate. So in order to sum up the amount of requests that were cancelled, we're going to use sum and the status field, because that allows us to sum something up depending on the value the field has. So status is cancelled by driver or cancelled by client. We're going to count that and sum that up, and if it's completed, we're not going to count that and not count that to our sum. And we can achieve that using if. I'm going to use the short form in MySQL, which means our if condition is before the first comma. Afterwards is what happens if that condition is true, and after the second comma is what happens if that condition is false. So our condition should be based on status. So if status is either cancelled by client or cancelled by driver, we should count that, and if it's not, we wouldn't count it. But there is a more clever way of doing that here, because we know status is an enum. So we can take the inverse and say if the status is not completed, that means it's either cancelled by driver or cancelled by client, and that means it has been cancelled. So we just say if the request is not complete, it's cancelled, and we're going to count that because it makes it a bit shorter. And we can do that here because we have an enum type. That means only these values are allowed for that field. So if the status is not completed, I'm going to put in a 1 here if it's true, and if it's false, a 0. That means if it's not completed, if it's cancelled, we're having a 1 for that row, otherwise a 0. And if we use the sum function afterwards, it's going to count up the number of times that condition has been true and the request has been cancelled. So that can be a bit confusing. You could also write it as status is cancelled by driver or status is cancelled by client. But we're going to leave it at that for now. And then we just need to calculate the number of requests in general. So we're just going to use count to count all rows because we don't depend on the value of status. Just going to count all fields. That's why we're using count here. And let's put in status here, so it's going to count the amount of rows for status. We could use star or 1 as a constant or anything else, but that might make it easier to understand. And now our only task is to round that. So we're going to use the round function and set it to 2 decimal places by just putting the 2 after comma and call that cancellation rate. And let's see what we get by running that right now. So we're not at the perfect solution yet, but we have a value for cancellation rate for each of these days. So right now we only have input data between the 1st and 3rd of October 2013, but in order to set that as a filter and make it work for other input data, we're gonna set request at to be greater or equal than our first date and being smaller or equal than our second date. Okay, we also need to take care of something else, being unbanned users only. So we're going to use our users table as a lookup table to find out whether either our client or driver is banned, and if that happens, we're not going to count them towards our cancellation rate. So in order to make sure our clients or drivers are not on the ban list, we're going to use our second table, users, and put another filter condition in there using not in. So I'm going to append to that where condition filter by using and checking whether either client ID or driver's ID is in that ban list, which we're going to establish right now. So client ID should not be in the users table where ban is true. So what happens in that subquery is we're going to select all users that are banned, which establishes the ban list, and then we're going to check whether client ID is in that ban list. Client ID is from our original table trips. So in order to do that for driver ID as well, I'm just going to copy that line and change client ID to driver ID. And that way we can check if either our client or driver is banned. And if that happens, we're not going to respect it in terms of calculating our cancellation rate. So if we run that code right now, we're just going to calculate cancellation rate for unbanned users. We can also rewrite our date filter to read a bit better by using between. So we're just going to set that filter of requests add to being between our dates by writing that using the between keyword, which works quite nicely for date ranges. So if we submit our final query, we should get an accepted output. And that's been pretty much it for that question. I think it's a good one because it is practical. It could be something that comes up in your day-to-day work, and it uses lookup tables like a ban list in this case quite well, and teaches you about summing up depending on a field value. If you want to follow along more tutorials or solutions, make sure to check out the other videos and maybe leave a subscription. I hope I'm going to see you in one of the other videos. Hopefully until next time. Bye.